Welcome to the Body and Beyond podcast with Alice and Gina.
A podcast sparking discussion on all things health, mindset, fitness, goals, and motivation.
We strive to help you to boost your confidence, to take the lead in your own life, to back yourself, and to step into your full potential. Body and Beyond is proudly sponsored by The Seed Cycle. The Seed Cycle is a beautiful female-founded Australian company. Seed cycling is a natural methodology that you can use to support your menstruation and your ovulation, and it can even be used to support your hormones through perimenopause and menopause. If you'd like 50% off your first month subscription, use the code BODYANDBEYOND at the Seed Cycle website www.theseedcycle.com.au. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Body and Beyond podcast with Alice and Gina. And today we have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Chris Swart. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I always appreciate getting an opportunity to talk to more people and share my knowledge. So this is going to be a great one. We've got a lot of good stuff lined up.
Amazing. And so to begin with, I would love you to introduce yourself for our listeners so they understand where you live, what your background is, and what you currently do.
Absolutely. Thank you for that opportunity. So my name is Dr. Chris Swart. I am currently in Massachusetts in the United States. I am an assistant professor at a small college in Massachusetts. So I teach exercise science. My PhD was at Springfield College, which is also in Massachusetts. So I didn't go far for my PhD. I stayed local. I have an undergraduate in exercise science. So that's kind of what I started with. My master's degree is in strength and conditioning. So really kind of when I got into the field of fitness, I went right into sport performance. So that was the early portion of my career. I spent maybe 2 or 3 years working for like 3 different Division I football programs. And then moving on from there, I, kind of came back to Massachusetts, decided I wanted to get the PhD. Did the PhD, I graduated in 2015, and I've had 4 different faculty roles since. So this is my 4th college that I've worked for. I've seen a lot of different programs and what works and what doesn't work. I've been blessed to be able to work with many, many different students that are out in the field doing great things. And so for me, one of the things I always tell people in podcasts is my kind of niche within this field is trying to take complex information that's heavy science and just try to simplify it for what people need to know. What's the need to know to get most of the results that people are looking for? So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm so excited about it.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so today we thought that a really great topic would be, in general, common myths that people believe in the fitness and health industry. And so we've got quite a few to go through today, which is really cool. So the first topic we thought would be really impactful for people is that common myth that people need to be eating every 3 hours, and 3 hours is often the time period thrown around, but every 3 hours to fire up their metabolism, to keep their metabolism high or stoke their metabolism. So what are the facts around that?
Yeah, no, this is something that really was popular years ago. People used to experiment with this type of stuff. And the old kind of adage was what you just said. If I eat every 3 hours, my metabolism's going to be higher, and basically that's going to lead to more fat loss or faster progress just in general. And so the easy way to test that is, okay, let's have 2 different types of groups. One have a meal frequency of lower, 2 or 3, and another group have a meal frequency of, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 8. And do we see, if their calories are the same, do we see more weight loss in the group that's eating more frequently? And those studies have come out, and we don't see that. What we see is it's total calories that matter, just like a budget would be. That's essentially, what total calories are. You can look at it like a budget. So if at the end of the day or week, you're still in the same spot with calories, it really doesn't matter how many meals you choose to eat per day. So the myth is, no, it's definitely not increasing your metabolism. We've got plenty of information on that, but you want to find find a meal frequency that works within your lifestyle. So there are people on the opposite end of the spectrum that only have one meal a day. Now that can work in certain cases, but it's not going to work in all cases. And that's one of the big things with, understanding health and fitness is everything's a tool. It just has to be put in the right context. And the only other thing that I'll say on this type of conversation is if you're looking to build muscle, having a low meal frequency is probably not going to be ideal. So you should be aware of that. If you can get all your calories in a meal or two, and you don't have massive body composition goals from the standpoint of trying to build lean mass, then that could be perfectly sustainable for your lifestyle. But we do know that if you want to put on muscle mass, you're probably going to need something like 3, 4, or 5 meals spread out throughout the course of the day, because you got to get enough protein in per meal sporadically to keep muscle growth sustained. And so that's a mistake that I think a lot of people make when they have too many meals per day. The amount of protein to really trigger muscle growth stays below a certain level. So, they're not getting, those bigger bursts of protein during the course of the day to really build mass. So that's really important. So the bottom line is it's up to you how many meals that you fit within your lifestyle. Just be careful. If the meal frequency is too low, it's going to be harder to build muscle. And also if the meal frequency is too low, you have a higher chance of binge eating because you're taking probably bigger gaps between your meals. And that can kind of cause, from a hormonal perspective, a drive to even eat more. And at the end of the day, now you're worse off. Your calories are now higher. And now you have a propensity to gain weight in that fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really interesting. And I was just going to say as well, would you also correlate that back to intermittent fasting, when people tend to think that having less meals a day or intermittent fasting is going to increase their fat loss further? But again, would you come back to that same rule as it's your total daily intake? So whether you're eating those calories at, 3 or 4 interval periods during the day, or whether you're eating those same calories spread out in more small meals across the day, you're still going to be losing the same amount of fat.
100% correct. I couldn't have said it any better myself, because that's 100% true. It still comes down to total daily calories. I'm not against intermittent fasting. Obviously, I'm really not against many things that I think are tools that can be utilized. The problem is, like we just said, if you're intermittent fasting and it's you have too long of a fasting window, those other things, you're not going to optimize certain areas. But fasting can come with great other health benefits. And for some people, they just feel better, having longer periods throughout the day, not eating, and that's perfectly fine. And there's many different ways to intermittent fast. The most common one that we see is probably, the 16 hours of non-eating and 8 hours of eating. But there's people that do 20 hours of a fast, 4 hours of eating, 10 and 14. I mean, there's all different ways to break it down. So one of the most common things that I tell everybody in health and fitness, you just have to have some trial and error and figure out what works best for you and what's most sustainable. Because you never want to, in my opinion, you don't want to make very many nutritional changes or lifestyle changes that you can't do forever. If this is something that you can sustain in your life for the long haul and it's creating positive changes, keep doing it. That's the way I look at it.
And so that's the common myth. Hey, so general population thinking that they need to eat frequently, so be snacking constantly throughout the day, having lots and lots of meals. And so what we really want to stress though is that if you do have physique goals, if you do want to put on muscle, there is a lot of research showing that you want to have, those 4 main boluses of protein throughout the day. So at least kind of 4 meals. Is that what you were saying, Dr. Chris? 4 to 5 meals?
Yeah, the research on this is really clear. I mean, it's about 3 to 5 servings of protein that you're going to need. And this is for people who really want to maximize or optimize muscle growth. But 3 to 5 meals. And you're probably going to want to get a minimum of like 20 to maybe 30 grams, depending on body size, 20 to 30 grams of protein in those meals, because you need a sufficient amount to really trigger muscle growth. And not to get too sciencey, there's also an amino amino acid known as leucine. And leucine is really the main trigger for muscle growth. So you really need to get 20 to 30 grams of protein. And then within those 20 to 30 grams, you're probably going to need somewhere between maybe 2 to 4 grams on the higher end of leucine to really turn on the light switch and trigger the muscle growth response. And so those are really key aspects that I think maybe not enough people talk about, and not enough people, really educate some of their clientele that, hey, if you're intermittent fasting or if you have too long of fasting windows, you're not going to be able to put on as much lean mass. So it's something that I talk about a lot because I want people to know some of those nuances.
And that's the challenging thing when people do use intermittent fasting as a way to almost control themselves. Like they've given themselves strict guidelines as to when they eat, and it works for them. But again, if they're wanting to really achieve their body composition goals, it's not optimal necessarily unless they are quite specific during that 8-hour window as to what they are consuming. So they're really making sure they are eating sufficient protein and taking care of, like, covering all bases within that strategy, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because the last thing I'll say too is even if somebody wanted to do intermittent fasting from the standpoint of they wanted to lose more fat mass, it's still a bad option, even if it did work, because now you're not getting those 3 to 5 protein feedings. So even if you're in a calorie deficit, meaning you're eating less calories than you're burning, it's still important to keep protein high to maintain the lean mass that you do have. Absolutely. Because if not, when you start to lose weight and you're not getting those protein feedings, a greater percentage of that weight loss is going to come from muscle tissue or lean tissue in general. And that's hard. You really can't combat against that. And that's obviously not what people want. When people lose weight, they clearly want to lose fat mass from painting broad strokes in generalizations for most people.
Exactly. And that's the challenge as well, is it's fat that people want to lose. It's not weight. And it's so hard, isn't it, when people are really measuring themselves based on scale weight and thinking that their strategy is working, when really it's like, are you genuinely losing fat? And are you doing everything you can to support that? So
yeah, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole.
No, let's not.
The scale weight is something that I wish people just put so much less stock into. That could be a whole podcast episode in and of itself.
Of course. Yeah. All right. Well, moving on then to the next common myth. The next one here is that sugar coming from fruit is bad for you.
So this one comes up a lot. And it's kind of scary that it comes up because, from like an overall health standpoint, how could somebody be afraid of fruit? And when I first started hearing that, and then I said, okay, but it kind of makes sense. I had to take a step back and say, I get some of the messaging that's out there. So what people mean is, you should stay away from the carbohydrates that, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit later on in the podcast, but stay away from the carbohydrates or limit the carbohydrates that don't have things like fiber, vitamins, and minerals. When you eat fruit is loaded with fiber, which helps, allow the digestive tract to function better. It allows you to limit blood sugar spikes. It allows you to, limit cholesterol and have better cholesterol profile. There's so many factors there. And then the fruit comes with essential vitamins and minerals, as obviously, vegetables do as well, and all these other things. But what really started to give fruit a bad rap was the fructose, because people would say, well, the fructose, the fruit sugar, would be bad for the liver. And so once again, it's like, okay, let's test that. Let's give healthy people one group. I think the study was like 50 grams of fructose in one group. Then they tripled it for another group to like 150 grams. And they made sure that total calories were the same. So it still comes back to the total calorie conversation. So they make sure that it's the same. The only difference is one group had way more fructose than the other. They look at liver function, no issues with liver function at all, no signs that it's creating any damage. So the point is, fructose is not something that I think people should be afraid of. Now, if you have a liver condition, if there's something metabolically wrong with the liver, having high fructose going through the liver could cause some problems for some people. And that's why nothing's always all or nothing. You know what I mean? It's like, there's a lot of gray area to a lot of this stuff. I just don't want, as an exercise science professional, I just don't want to see people feel like they can't have fruit, because fruit's also loaded with good carbohydrates that's going to fuel your performance, and it's going to fuel your brain function. And there's so many good things that come with that. It just comes down to calorie balance. So once again, if you're having a ton of fruit and it's putting you hundreds of calories over your target, that can be some added stress to the liver. And yes, that could start to be problematic. But to be honest with you, the last thing I'll say is saturated fats are way worse for your liver than something like fructose. If you're going to say that, there's something to watch out for as far as liver function, it's something more like saturated fats than it is the fructose in the actual fruit.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
I would love to know a little more about, what you would recommend in terms of quantity though. So for example, I know a lot of girls who obviously love to eat fruit, but I'm more talking like a big bowl of fruit salad for a lunch, as opposed to, would you say there was more of a benefit to have rice as a pre-workout than a fruit salad? Like, is there really going to be a difference there between the way that it's utilized when it comes to training, the breakdown and that sort of thing? Or would you recommend a certain amount of fruit per day as opposed to, getting all your carbohydrate intake from fruit?
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions I think we could go there. I think the short answer is, to me, from what I see, it really isn't a big difference. You're kind of splitting hairs when you start to talk about, is fruit versus something like white rice. These are more simple carbohydrates that are fast acting, they are digested quicker. So what I would say is those are things you want to ingest maybe like 30 to 60 minutes before your workout. So if we're looking at like timing, that's a pretty decent time area. It may be 30 to 90 minutes depending on the person, but you're relatively close to your workout. You could basically do any type of more of those simple carbohydrates. If you're having a bigger meal a little bit later, a little bit earlier than that, let's say more like 3 or 4 hours before you work out, that's where I'd rather see like different carbohydrates, like your wheat breads, your quinoas, sweet potatoes, more of those complex carbohydrates would be something that's kind of better off if you're looking at that type of a window. So I would look at it more so from a feeding window perspective. The types of carbs really, play kind of a more moderate role in that. And then the only other thing I'll say as far as quantity, like I'd rather somebody have obviously fruit than some other form of, highly processed, sweet type of food. So, I don't necessarily think I have an upper limit, but I typically tell people try to have more vegetables than fruit. Like that's kind of a goal that I would give to clients on average. If somebody's more of a fruit lover, this is where it comes down to personal preference. There's nothing wrong with that. You could have more fruits than veggies. But I think a lot of your vegetables are going to come with just better micronutrition, better fiber, and just overall physiologically, I think they pack a better health punch. But really, I wouldn't say there's much of an upper limit on my end.
I think what's really important to add as well for the listeners is that it's important that every individual pays attention to what really works well for you in your prior to training. So what's your optimal pre-workout meal, and pay attention to that, and try different things, but then really pay attention to what works for you, because some people may have more digestion issues if they have a big bolus of fruit right before training. It might be harder, they might not feel as good in the gut, or someone else might not feel good having rice, or so it is important for it to be fast digesting, but also you got to figure out what works for you as well.
Yeah, it's a great point you just brought up, because like everybody's gut health is very unique. It's kind of like a fingerprint, we're all very individualistic in that. And because there's different types of sugars, certain sugars can create different disturbances within the gut. And, simply there's a lot of nutritionists and registered dietitians out there that'll just pick different of those sugars, eliminate them, and see if that's the problem. So yeah, you do have to spend some time, if you really get into the world of like starting to really optimize and push this stuff, you do have to do some trial and error and find those things that what is best for you, timing, what types of foods, all those things.
I've definitely done a lot of trial and error with my pre-workouts over the years, for sure. I'm sure you have as well, but
Yep.
it's definitely something that I've had phases of finding something that really works and then, trying something else and going, nope, that's not feeling good. So it's definitely one of those things.
That time,
yeah, you just kind of want to experiment a little, I guess, with what works for you.
On that note, what have you found your best pre-workout, Alice, and then Chris? So Al, what have you found is the best for you personally?
I personally like quite quick or fast digestive carbs, like either white bread or a bagel or cereal or something, like pretty within like 45 minutes of training, like that kind of close. But if I have a meal with like rice or whole grains, I definitely feel I prefer to have it like 2 hours before training at least, like really give it some time to digest and then train. I think that really works well for me, like not training after I've just eaten. But if I do have to eat, it'll be something like really light, like a small bowl of cereal or something, like 45 minutes before, and then I feel good to go. Yeah. Those things work for me personally.
Yeah, for me, I don't do a lot of like, I'm not a supplement guy, so I stay away from supplements. So I don't do any like caffeine pre-workout, nothing like that. I'm one of those people where I can eat relatively close to my workout. So if it's really close to my workout, I'll go with like a Greek yogurt and a banana or something along those lines. Like you're saying, Alice, if it's a little bit further out, then yeah, bagels, English muffins, all those types of foods what I would kind of look into. One thing I've noticed during running, or like if I'm going to go for a run, I prefer the liquid carbohydrates prior. So like I'll have, some sort of apple juice or some sports drink that's going to give me, anywhere between, I don't know, 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrates, probably, within 30 to 60 minutes before I work out, running specifically. And that's just what I found best for me. I can lift weights with food in my stomach. I can't run with food in my stomach.
Yeah. I think that goes the same for people who train early in the morning. You'll find a lot of people get a little bit confused as to whether they need to have a pre-workout, but you'll know that some people get up and they can train really well fasted without eating before if they're training really early. So I guess it's the same thing again, like really depends on the person.
And I just want to jump in there quickly and make sure. So when Al said pre-workout, then she meant pre-workout meal for anyone listening, not pre-workout supplement, because they're very different things, aren't they? Pure caffeine and supplements versus an actual meal. But since we've jumped onto that topic, why don't we move on to that next myth? And that is that fasted cardio is superior for fat loss over other types of cardio.
Yeah, this is one that a ton of people on social media talk about. This is kind of one of those things that I think they want to tell you that there's some secret, that they have a secret here. And the way you can look at fasted cardio is what people will say is if you work out fasted. So let's say, you go to bed at night, you wake up in the morning, you don't eat any breakfast, and you go for a 3-mile run on a treadmill or whatever. That because you haven't eaten any carbohydrates, you're going to have to burn more fat. So it is 100% true that during that workout, you're using a greater percentage of fat as of the total calories that are getting burned. More of it's coming from fat because you didn't just eat and you don't have those carbohydrates, and more is going to come from body fat. The problem is later on in the day, as you eat, you're going to store more of the dietary fat that you're eating and basically replace it and burn more of the carbohydrates throughout the course of the day because you didn't have them earlier. So the point is, at the end of the day, you're still in the same spot. So although it is true that you burn more fat during a fasted workout, it still comes down to, surprise, surprise, calorie balance again, where if you're eating the same amount of calories, and especially protein as well, if you can, and there's been studies where they've done fasted cardio and non-fasted cardio under the same conditions of calories and protein, no difference in weight loss. Yes, acutely, there's a little bit, but that's only an hour of your day compared to the other 23 hours where things kind of go back to normal. Like I said, the dietary fat gets replaced and you burn carbohydrates from basically as the dominant source. And I think most people probably aren't aware of that. Well, they probably are, is carbohydrates and fats are your main fuel source, during the day and during exercise. So basically you can look at it like a toggle. Your metabolism is really kind of switching depending on what you're doing for exercise intensity or what you're doing on a daily basis. It just switches mainly between carb and fat burning, depending on what you're doing. So it still comes down to calorie balance. But there is one benefit. Well, actually, there's two benefits to fasted cardio that I'd like to talk about. The first one is fasted cardio isn't a waste. So I don't want anybody to think that, oh, if I do fasted cardio, that I'm not getting any benefit from it. You're just not getting the fat loss benefit, so to speak. But we do know that if you're doing fasted cardio, you're teaching your body to burn fats more effectively. And that can help in the long run. It can help for athletes. It can help for the general public that just wants to be fitter and look healthier. So there is some potential benefit from that aspect of it, but it's still understanding that you still have to keep your calories controlled. And there does seem to be some benefit with the ability to break down the fat that's within your muscle. So we actually do have fat that we store in our muscle. And if you do some fasted cardio from time to time, you're going to be able to access what we call intramuscular fat more efficiently. And we know that people that exercise on a regular basis store more fat in their muscle that they can access when they work out. So those are good benefits and good reasons to do fasted cardio, or it might just fit within your schedule, like we've already talked about with other things, based off of your work schedule, your overall life schedule. You may have to do cardio first thing in the morning and you can't eat anything prior, and that's perfectly fine. But my only thing when the fasted cardio conversation comes up, and the reason why we brought up this myth, is it does not lead to more fat loss. It's not there's very few, if any, ways to really trick your body. Your body's just too smart.
And so it's a fine thing to do, fasted cardio, if it works for you, but it's not, as long as people don't think that they're actually burning more fat when they do it. The next myth to be busted is that soreness and sweating are indicators of an effective or a great workout.
Yeah, it's a myth that you see all the time with people that are like laying down on the ground after their workout, and they post pictures of, there's just a pool of sweat on the ground, and I worked so hard. And there seems to be this dogma sometimes in the fitness space of, the harder you work, the more sore you are. You got a better workout in, the more you sweat. It's a badge of honor to leave the gyms all sweaty. I mean, it just gets into this situation where it's like, time out, let's take a look at this. So if you chase soreness, and this is really, really problematic, people need to understand, obviously, soreness is you created some disruption to your body, right? Clearly, it's saying, ouch, 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 don't do that again, at least for a while. And what happens is, if you constantly chase soreness, it's okay to be sore from time to time. We all are, especially when you do something a little bit different. But if you're sore consistently, it will get to you. It will cause problems down the road. Of course it will. How can it not? And here's basically what happens. When you're sore, you break down your muscle cell membranes, you break down tons of proteins within your muscle. And of course, we want to eat dietary protein so we can build it back up. The problem is, it's not just the protein that we need to build up that helps your muscle contract. But like I said, there's also the cell membrane. There's also other proteins deeper within the cell. So what happens is, basically, if you're sore all the time, your body does everything it can do just to repair other portions of the muscle, and not the portions of the muscle that's going to actually, lead to more muscle growth. It's literally just trying to keep afloat, so to speak. And so it's this never-ending process of, you're getting some repair, but it's not the growth that people are typically looking for when they lift weights. Now, some people don't lift weights for muscle growth. Some people are, exercising for strength, obviously, let's say. So if you're overly sore and you're chasing soreness, what's going to happen is your nervous system is going to be less effective. And the nervous system obviously communicates with your muscle, and it tells it to produce, some force so you can do a bicep curl, for example. If you chase soreness too much, now your brain, there's something called central fatigue. Now your brain doesn't communicate with your muscle as effectively. And it can't, basically, there's something known as rate coding, which is basically a fancy term to just mean how quickly and how frequent can the nervous system impact the muscle. And if you're sore all the time, that's decreased. So now you can't access the same level of strength. So strength can start to go down and plateau and even drop. And, now at the same time, you're not able to access certain muscle fibers to help you grow, because we need a fresh nervous system to access all of our muscle fibers, or the most we can, to really produce a growth in lean mass. So chasing soreness is going to inhibit all of those things. When we get into the sweating conversation, this is a tough one because everybody's different. Like, some people just have a higher concentration of sweat glands. Some people have a higher sweat rate. Sweating could indicate a pathology. Sweating could indicate a hormonal problem. So it's not just like, yes, more sweating equals a more efficient workout. In many cases, depending on the goal, it's the opposite. Because if I'm doing a strength session and I want to build a lot of strength, I'm going to take a good amount of rest in between my sets. It could be 3, 4, 5 minutes. So during a strength session, I'm probably not going to sweat as much as if I was doing more of a bodybuilding style, shorter rest periods, higher volume workout. So the type of the workout is going to be impacted by the goal, and that's going to impact how much you're sweating and things like that. So, sweating is just another one bad indicator as far as, overall, was that an effective workout? Because sometimes, as we all know on this podcast, sometimes you walk into a fitness center or the gym and you don't have it for the day. You feel like, hey, I gotta dial back a little bit and not push as hard because I'm not physically ready. Maybe you didn't eat as well that day. Maybe you had poor sleep, a stressful day at work. And those are the days that tend to be the most efficient workouts and beneficial for you, because you were able to pull it back and the intensity was lower. And in the long run, you're setting yourself up for more success. So the bottom line is, don't chase soreness and sweating, but monitor it. You should be aware of it. If you are sore, you should know, why are you sore? What did you do differently? And just make a mental note of that, because these are all things that we want to pay attention to in overall progress. What gives us a good stimulus? Because that tells you that you did something. What gives us a good stimulus to feel a particular exercise or some type of method that you're using?
And especially if people are working towards muscle growth, what's so important is that gradual progressive overload, isn't it? So you don't necessarily need to smash yourself or annihilate yourself. It needs to be that's the steady steps and stages as you progress through, whether you're increasing the volume or the load or the frequency, how often you're training. So that's what's really important.
I think it's so important to remind people as well about that sweat really doesn't correlate to how good or effective a workout is. So I just find like that also sort of leads into that whole idea of people too often probably treating their workouts as exercise and calorie burning, as opposed to really actually taking the time in their sets to do their sets properly, to do each rep properly, progressive overload, like you said, Gina, and then actually having the adequate rest time. Because if you don't rest adequately in between your sets, you also won't get maximum benefit of each set as well. So you really want to move away, if your goal is to, gain muscle or gain strength, pull away from that feeling of needing to sweat in a workout, because it really doesn't have any correlation between those goals at all.
Yeah, that was very well said. And I agree 1,000%. It's, I think, one of the most misunderstood areas of like program design and when people are, working out in a fitness center is understanding rest periods. I don't think a lot of people have a good understanding of what is my goal and then how do I implement rest periods, to basically achieve that goal. And you see so many, and once again, this is another rabbit hole we don't need to go down, but you see everybody promoting high intensity interval training and, all these types of methods that are good here and there, but you can't go in and do that every day. You have to protect your nervous system, because your nervous system is what's driving your muscle. So if you go in and you basically, I'll use the term red line, you basically go pedal to the metal or maximum all the time, you're not giving your nervous system an ability to recover. And that creates, a situation where you're limiting the output to grow. You're limiting the output to get stronger. And we need that. Like, I don't think a lot of people sometimes realize the effort that you have to put in to build muscle and the effort that has to go in to get stronger. You got to be exerting yourself. And if you exert yourself at the most amount of effort you can for 8 repetitions, 6 repetitions, that should take some time to recover. If you're really pushing yourself and then you can do another set in 20 seconds later, you probably weren't pushing yourself as much as you should have been. So rest periods, that's the point I wanted to make. Rest periods, I think, is a very misunderstood area of fitness. And I encourage everybody to really kind of, learn more about how they can monitor rest periods for their specific goal.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up as well the psychological component as well, like especially for beginners when they have, or people who aren't regular gym goers, and their experience in the past may have been that every time they train, it's hard. And then they pull up crippling, like they're almost crippled with how sore they are, and it affects them for quite a few days. So psychologically, that then gives them the perspective that training equals pain and equals soreness. But when really what we're trying to say is that you need to dial it right back and then progressively progress over time, So I think that's a really big psychological thing for a lot of beginners or people who they don't have a training history necessarily.
I was just going to say on that, Gina, like it's also because they've been through that period of knowing what it feels like to be the newbie, and to, you do generally get some pretty harsh DOMs when you just started something brand new, but then they end up a few weeks later finally adapting and then thinking like, oh, I need to change it up because now I'm not getting sore anymore. Yeah. So it's not working, which is not right. It's not true at all, is it?
No.
Some of the things that I typically say to beginners is, number one, almost anything you do is going to get results. If you've never really done this before and never really done resistance training or aerobic training, or, you really start to hone in on it, you don't need to push yourself to the max to get results, not even close to it. So that's case in point number one. But number two is slow and steady wins the race in fitness in general. You just see too many people go pedal to the metal and do everything that they possibly can in like 6-8 weeks, and they burn themselves out. And then they have to take another 6-8 weeks to try and get back to some normal feeling, and then do the same thing all over again. So slow and steady wins the race, nice and progressive. Each week, each month, you just slowly build off each other. Make sure you take a week or two here and there to pull things back, let your body recover, pay attention to your nutrition. And if you just keep doing those things and try not to get too fancy. I see a lot of people like pick the fanciest exercises they can. The basics work with 80-90%, and then sprinkle in the fun stuff, because we all want to enjoy it too. That's what's going to be the best roadmap for success, and slow and steady for sure.
And that's something we say time and time again on our podcast, is it's about the bigger picture. It's about being consistent, and it's about enjoying what you do. And over time, the results will come, whatever that may be, or just the general health will come, of course. Cool. The next one, let's get into carbs make you fat. And also the fact that a lot of the general population think that in order to lose weight or body fat, that they need to actually cut out carbs from their diet.
Yeah, carbohydrates, it's, all the time on social media, I'm talking about carbohydrates. I spend a lot of time in my classes because I've had so many students in the past that really thought that. I mean, these are exercise science students that are, afraid of eating carbohydrates. And so carbohydrates, you got to look at it like this. Clearly, we brought this up earlier a little bit. There's really good carbohydrate sources, and there's really not necessarily that they're bad, but you don't want to have them on a regular basis in a big portion of your overall diet. So when people try to classify like carbohydrates as bad, they'll look at the simple carbohydrates, the cakes, the cookies, the candies, pastas, things that are very pleasurable to eat. And those carbohydrates are not any different necessarily than the carbohydrates that you're going to see in fruit or vegetables. The problem is the carbohydrates that are coming from the cakes and the candies and the pastas, they don't have all those vitamins, minerals, fiber. So you're getting a lot of calories for very minimal of your other essential nutrients and things like that. So, and they're obviously made and manufactured to be hyper palatable. They're very tasty. And so you do have a greater drive to eat them, as well as when you go on to the opposite side with carbohydrates that are coming from like vegetables, for example, it's going to fill up your stomach more and have fiber. So it's more satiating, makes you feel fuller longer. So it's not that you have to cut out carbohydrates. You have to try to limit the carbohydrates that are hard to keep in your diet, like those simple carbohydrates, because of the fact that, it's going to push those calories so high, and that leads to weight gain. It's not the carbohydrates per se that are leading to the weight gain. It still comes down to the total calories. And we know this, it's very clear because we've got really cool studies where people have calories the same, they've got protein the same, and then just mix and match carbohydrate and fat ratios. And at the end of the day, they're all the same when it comes to weight loss. There's no real difference whether or not somebody splits up the remainder of their calories 50% fat, 50% carb, or whether or not somebody splits it up, 75-25. You have a lot of flexibility with your carbs and fat. Now, if you're looking to truly optimize physique and things like that, it's a little bit different conversation. But yeah, I mean, as long as you're hitting a minimal fat threshold, so like we know fat is important for a lot of things, specifically like especially hormonal balance, but fat protects vital organs. We need fat to build, hormones, all these different types of things. So if you're able to hit some minimal fat threshold, you've got leeway with your carbohydrates. And oftentimes when people are trying to diet and limit their calories, oftentimes people will keep protein the same, keep fat the same, and just pull them from carbohydrates. So you can have plenty of success on higher carbohydrate diets. We see it time and time again, especially in the athletic world, people who do a lot of high intensity effort, whether it be sprinters or intermittent sports, different types of athletes that need that, runners, long distance runners. Carbs are their friend. It is the main energy source, during higher intensity activities. So that's beneficial. You need carbohydrates for your brain health. You need carbohydrates because your red blood cells need carbohydrates to function. They use glucose. So there's so many positives to having carbs. It's just the carbs, like I said before, that come with no other essential vitamins, minerals, or very minimal. Those are the ones that get people in trouble. And it's just sad to me that people just want to say, all carbs, stay away from all carbs. Well, no. You want to eat the carbs that are going to be fueling your overall health, fueling how you feel, and allowing you to perform well in the fitness center, in your gym, or in your workouts, so you can continuously make progress. Carbs are vital for that.
Yes, I do love carbs myself.
Great. Did you want to say anything to that note, Alice?
No, I mean, I think that's just a really important point to make. Time and time again, always coming back to, I think if your goal is to lose weight, I think the thing that you really need to focus on is understanding how much energy or how many calories you're actually consuming in a day. I think that's probably the most important thing. And then if you're within, like what you said, if you're within that calorie range, whether you have carbs in that range or you don't, it doesn't matter. So, and the thing you were saying about cookies as well and cakes, the thing about those types of carbs is often they come with so many other things as well, right? It's not just eating like a bowl of rice or a bowl of pasta or a bowl of oats or something. You're going to eat a cookie that's going to probably have the same amount of carbs as a bowl of rice, but it's also going to be loaded with fat as well as all the other artificial ingredients that are also added in to make it, taste so good. So again, that's just going to bump the calories up even higher again. So yeah, I mean, I love carbs. I've always followed a very high carb to moderate to low fat diet personally. It just works really well for my training and my energy. So yeah, it makes me sad to think that so many people out there who are trying to get results with their body composition think that they need to cut out all types of carbs altogether and just live off basically salad and protein, which is, it's not very enjoyable, is it? Personally, I don't think it is.
No.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, from what I'm seeing in like the current fitness world, they go right to, okay, tell me what I need for macros. It's right to macros. And people are just, I think the average person just learning doesn't really understand the importance of its calorie balance first. Figure that out, and then you start to really optimize, right? Then you can start to say, okay, how much, protein is going to be best for me? How many grams of carbs? How many grams of fat? That all comes after you figure out. You can do a little bit simultaneously, but until you figure out whatever your maintenance level is, as far as calories, where you're eating consistently the same number of calories, and you don't see significant changes in the scale, it stays within a pound or two, that's a good maintenance level that is for you right then and there. Then you can start to, really tweak your macros. But I hope the listeners are really getting kind of the overall theme here of, throughout all of these myths, really, we keep coming back to that conversation of knowing your total caloric intake is such an important health number that you don't have to be overly specific with it every single day of your life, but you need to know in general how much you're eating per day. And if once you figure that out, it makes everything in health and fitness so much smoother, is a great word, so much smoother.
Yeah. A lot of it is a lot more simple than people think, isn't it?
I tell my students sometimes, like, some of the myths that I talk about, because I've got a list of probably like 30 things that I love, different myths that I love talking about. And I tell my students, and I'm very open about this, some of these I believed, some of these I used to actually tell people. And now we know enough for me to go the opposite and say, hey, that wasn't the smartest idea, but that's what we knew at that time. And now we've got better information and we need to evolve. I think sometimes people, like, when they hear certain people in the fitness community speak, and they listen to somebody speak, maybe a video is like 8 years old, and they're like, oh, that person doesn't know what they're talking about. Look at what they're saying. Sometimes you got to look at the year of what somebody posted, because we learn so much so frequently. So I'm glad you brought that up. Just because people believe in these, or they may have thought these myths were true prior to this podcast, you're in the same spot of so many people, including very high level fitness professionals. So nobody should ever be like ashamed or embarrassed if they believe certain myths. That's the reason why we have platforms like this, to be able to get into some deeper detail and explain to people, hey, context matters, right? That's how are you putting this into your overall lifestyle? That's what's best. We're all our own individual story.
Yeah. And so on that note, I had a question for you, Dr. Chris. So what has been the biggest catalyst for you in your life in regards to these type of myths that has really helped you move the needle forward on your own health, fitness, and physique?
So when you say catalyst, meaning like, why am I so passionate to talk about these types of things?
That would also be really interesting. I was more so getting at, with this topic we're going through today, which of these myths, is there one in particular that once you learnt that it was not true for you in your personal life, was there one that really made a difference for you with your training or your physique?
Or any myth in general.
Or any, or in general.
Oh, if we go any myth. So there's a big one that I have. I used to be a big fan and proponent of branched chain amino acids.
Okay.
I used to think, well, hey, that makes sense. They're so important for skeletal muscle. And it wasn't until, within the last handful of years that it's very, very clear now, like branched chain amino acids, if you are getting enough protein in per day from good quality protein sources, a branched chain amino acid supplement is not going to do anything at all, really. There was some information a while back that it could potentially aid in recovery and muscle recovery. And in some cases that could be true, especially if someone was on a vegan diet, so they weren't getting as many animal-based products. So they would be lacking in some of those, because branched chain amino acids are essential amino acids. So they might be lacking in that. That could be a reason to use them. But I mean, I used to think that just about anybody that lifted weights or had any resistance training or body composition goal should have branched chain amino acids. And now it's like, whoa, stay away if you think that it's going to give you some added muscle boosting benefit. So that was my big one for sure.
Yeah.
It's really hard as well, because that they would literally cherry pick the smallest things, these supplement companies, like what you just said, that small reasoning that might make them beneficial for some people, like if you were vegan, and they will use that and they'll market it as you need this to train to recover. And then everyone thinks, oh my God, like I need this to live. But really, like, no, you don't.
If there's one thing I've learned about supplements, it's you very rarely need them. For the most part, you can get everything you need if you know what you're doing and you plan it out correctly through a normal diet. That's what it's there. Food literally is medicine. So if you're able to plan and have a structured and sound diet, there's very few things that you may need to supplement with. In the supplement industry, once again, a whole nother podcast we could talk about, a lot of them, there's good companies out there. So I'm never bashing all, but there's just a lot of supplement products out there where they make up a problem basically, and then sell you this solution of, hey, take this and it's going to help you out. And they can pull like one or two studies that have some potential mechanism that could work. And then it's like, well, once you test that on the larger scale, it doesn't pan out that way. So, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but you got to really pay attention to the supplements and do your homework. For anybody that's taking supplements, just make sure you're getting a good quality product that's been tested, it's been verified, and it's something that is going to help you, because there are great ones out there. So I'll never say that there's no good supplements. Plenty of good supplements out there, and there's plenty of good supplement companies out there. But yeah, be careful with, hey, take this and it's going to be this helpful magic solution for you. It almost never is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That would be a really interesting topic as well. Maybe we could do another one down the track on basically just chatting through supplements.
I would love to. So just quickly, the answer to like why I love doing these myths is, so I've been teaching as a professor. This is my 7th year now. And every single year, I talk about some of this stuff in class and students are mind blown, like, wait a second, I've always heard this. And I'm thinking, okay, these are people that are interested in exercise. They're going to college to, get an exercise science degree. And even with their just general getting into the career, but they're still absorbing information and trying to learn. And even a lot of my students believe some of these myths. And that's when I said, that was the light bulb moment. Like, listen, if a lot of them believe this, then the general public definitely, by and large, has a lot of these myths in their brain that they do think are true. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I kind of feel like my role, or especially as a PhD, one of my roles or niches that I can really fill is, let's take the complex stuff and just narrow it down, like I feel like we did today, to just say, hey, here's the things you really need to know to make the best decisions for yourself. And so that's why I started getting into the podcast, more on the myth side, because I think it's so important. I wish, I could tell everybody. I wish I could stand from the mountaintop and tell everybody, some of these myths, and just make sure that, I don't want to see people waste their time. I guess that's the bottom line, right? I don't want to see people say, man, if I only knew that a year or two ago, I'd be in such a better spot. And yeah, that's true, but I want to avoid more. The more people I can avoid feeling that way, the better off.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a question as well, Alice, that you wanted to ask?
I think Dr. Chris has probably answered this in everything that he said today. I was going to say, if you were going to give listeners like basically the most simple key tips to getting fitter and healthier, like what would those few key tips be in this like industry of just information overload, right? Mm-hmm. If someone was to come to you and go, I have no idea how to get fitter and healthier, like what would be the most important things?
Man, that is the best question you could have asked all night, because I'm going to give an answer that people will be like, well, that's kind of simple, but it's an effective answer. I think first and foremost, we already brought it up, your story is your story. Don't compare to others. Take your time with it. Reach out to people that have been exercising longer than you, follow good social media, really try to learn from people that have been there before, that's anything in life. That's for success. If somebody's been there before, they've got a roadmap, you should at least learn how they got there. You might not go through the same roadmap, but you at least are going to be able to probably take some of the same turns and twists along the way. So that's important. The first thing I tell people is if you've never really exercised before, you're just trying to now get into it and take it serious, find something you enjoy first. I don't care what it is, as long as you're moving, as long as you're getting into a healthier state, that's the benefit. You can figure out how to optimize and change things down the road. So definitely start off with something you enjoy, whatever form of exercise that is for you. I tell people that I'm such a big proponent of cardiovascular exercise, obviously. I tell people, if you could hit a solid, 20, 30 minutes, that's great. If you can't, try to maybe start off with 5 or 10 minutes, take a break, 5 or 10 minutes, but 2 or 3 workouts a week to start at somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes at a lower intensity. That's great. That's going to help you out. But I'm a bigger proponent in talking about the resistance training side of it, because if you really want to keep your metabolism going, if you want to keep, we've got information now from people who maintain more lean muscle throughout their life tend to have better cognitive function, lower risk of neurodegenerative diseases. There's better bone health. There's so many benefits to resistance training. So I always encourage people to obviously get into resistance training, and don't think that has to be lifting weights. Like when you first start, you can get plenty of benefit from resistance bands. You can get benefit from your own body weight training. There's so many ways that you can get benefit from a resistance perspective, but you got to be resistance training. You got to know your calories, or at least try to figure out and monitor your total caloric intake. Oftentimes with clients that I've had in the past, I'll say, listen, let's just track it for, 3 to 5 days. Honestly, track what you're eating. It's going to be eye-opening. It'll be so empowering for you early on in your fitness career to spend a couple of days doing that. It's one of my biggest pieces of advice. Even if you don't do it for the long term, you'll just be able to have better portion control decision making. And that's a skill in and of itself. You got to stay hydrated. Typically I'll tell people, a good starting point is half your body weight in ounces. That's been my general recommendation. And then, as you're exercising and whatever environment you'll be in, you may need more. But pay attention to hydration, make sure you're drinking plenty of water. And the one thing that people still to this day discount, and it is the number one performance enhancing thing you can do, is get plenty of sleep. People, I think, we've got some good research now on sleep and sleep quality and duration and its impact in body composition. People who don't sleep as many hours as they should, or their quality of sleep is lower, when they gain weight, they tend to gain more weight from fat, or more fat weight and not as much lean mass. And when those people go and try to diet, they tend to lose more lean tissue and not as much fat mass as they want. So sleep is your most powerful performance enhancing thing that you can do to keep seeing progress. So make sure you do that. And then I would also say keep your non-exercise activity high. So those are things like, getting up and walking around, taking the stairs, if you go to a store, parking a little bit further away from, the store and walking. Like that stuff, I know it sounds simple and obvious, but it's all about habits. It can be simple and obvious, but until you make it a habit and you're doing it on a regular basis, that's going to be beneficial, because especially people who try to lose weight, if you're in a weight loss phase, your non-exercise activity, even me just like talking through this podcast and fidgeting and moving my hands, those things tend to go down pretty dramatically. And so if you're conscious about it and it's already a habit and you keep your non-exercise activity high, then you're going to really keep your metabolism where it needs to be to continuously see sustained progress. So really nothing basic, right? Nothing like too advanced. It's nothing sleep, complex, it's hydration, it's progressive overload. It's, taking your time with things, learning from others, following good social media accounts, or, following good people that are putting out information that are telling you, here's how you do it, but here's why. Don't listen to people. In my opinion, I think that as a beginning exerciser, don't listen to people that are just telling you, do this, do this, do this. Listen to people that are going to help you with the why. Here's why this is good for you. Here's when it's not. Those are things that I want to see more of on, all kinds of different platforms. When can this work and when can this not? So yeah, simple things, but if you do those things, you are 80 to 90% at the game of optimal health. Then it's just figuring out things like meal timing, what's best for you, food composition, specific foods that may or may not work with your own physiology, sets and reps, all that stuff. You know, people want to jump straight to that. That's all secondary. Get the big things in place, and I promise you it'll stay, you know, you'll do this for life, because that's the goal. If you're going to do this and you're going to try and get healthy, you want to be healthy for life. You don't want to just be healthy for a year and then fall off the wagon. You want to do this long.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. Well, we typically wrap up our podcast with a question for our listeners. So today's question is, have you found yourself buying into any of the myths that we discussed today? And I want you to reflect on your biggest takeaway from today, just one thing, and think into the future about how you can action this new learning. And if you find old detrimental thinking coming up for you, are you able to become aware of this thinking in the moment and make a change?
I love it.
Thanks for joining us today. That was freaking awesome. And yeah, some really great topics to go through. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate you allowing me to come onto your platform and just sharing my knowledge. I mean, this was great. I would love to come back sometime if you guys have any other topics and we can rock and roll with it. I'm very pleased. So thank you a lot.
Would love that.
Yeah, we would definitely love to have you back at some point. I feel like you've also got a extremely extended list of myths to go through as well. So I think we've only even touched the little tip of the iceberg today. So
yeah,
there is never a shortage of myths in the health and fitness space, because that's just what is there's so many people out there that just want to show you a quick fix or sell you a quick fix. And so I'm happy to always talk about those types of things.
Yeah,
awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning into today's podcast, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. See you later.
Bye, guys.
The Body and Beyond podcast is for information purposes only. This podcast does not constitute advice or services, and the statements and views of the hosts and guests are not medical advice. The information provided should not be used for treatment or diagnosis purposes. Please discuss any information from this podcast with your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle.